Hello, Venerable Robina.
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you. Good, darlings. Thank you so much. All right. So what should we do?
Well, it's your last teaching, and we're...
Is it really? Oh my gosh.
I know. I personally am sad about it. We've learned so much from you the last 4 sessions.
Oh, I'm so pleased. I'm so glad.
Much.
Good, good, good. So hang on a sec. Just a second. Just let me just double check something. Hang on. Two things I have to do. Okay, now I think I've lost you all. I don't know, I do something and then I lose.
We can hear you.
I know, suddenly I lose. I just got to go away for a second. I've got to get my picture back. For some reason I've lost you. Let me see what I have to do here. All right. Maybe if I click your link again, it'll get me back. Yes, there we go. Okay. Not quite there. Yeah, we're there. Okay, good. Our last teaching, indeed, okay, about the mind and its potential, the mind and how it functions. Buddha's, radically different view about the mind. You've got to say that. So we'll sort of do an overview tonight, and I think we'll have lots of questions tonight. We'll see what happens. Okay, so we think, let's have our prayer again. Yeah, let's do our prayer, our refuge. We'll think, and we're all sitting here together, relying on the Buddha and his teachings. So I'll say the first time in English, I'll say extra words for the prayer. So what we're saying is that until we are enlightened, who've kind of formally committed to being Buddhist. And then we're saying that by the virtuous karma we're creating, by the virtuous karmic seeds that we're dropping into our bank vault, if you like, I like to use that analogy. So we can be of benefit to others. I'll sing it 2 times. We can sing it 2 times in Tibetan. Sangye chadang soke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye drumpash jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chunyen gi personam ki drola penche sangye drumpashok. All right, so just to summarize, let's just go over everything. Summarize. mean, we all know the word mind is not a problem, but we have so many other have so many especially modern world with neuroscience, incredibly elaborate, detailed views of exactly what the mind is and mind as we do now, 2,500 years ago. But we have to see that he's using a radically different definition. I mean, so radically different, it's like another part of us, So this is what, and if we want to understand Buddhism, especially if we want to understand the whole view, Buddha's world view of how things exist, what are people, what is a person, what is, and the causes of happiness and the causes of suffering and our potential, we need to understand what he means by it. He's not asking us to agree, asking us to believe what he says, but we've got to know what he means. And then it's up to us to look into it, isn't it? I mean, this is what Buddha means. So the mind, first of all, the word mind, as we have to understand, in general, it's used synonymously with the word. We tend to give a more deep meaning to the word consciousness, somehow, but for the Buddha, they're used differently in different contexts, but essentially they're referring to the cognitive process. They're referring to that which makes us a sentient being. The word in Tibetan is very delicious, very direct. The term in Tibetan that we translate as sentient being is the word sem, mind possessor. It's very tasty, mind possessor. So what Buddha's saying is, and again, remember, where does this information come from? I don't know if I've said it in this class, but I've said it in countless other places, and it's really wonderful to hear. This is so important. I remember a scientist in New Zealand, happened to be a scientist in New Zealand, in Nelson, years ago, 15, 20 years ago. He said, who revealed the teachings to the Buddha? Now, that's an absolutely perfect question if you are asserting a creator, which is the usual view we all have. If you say religion, certainly the religions that we talk about, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, we all talk about a creator. So that's the assumption. We just have the assumption that religion equals believe in a creator, which you must do because you can't prove it. I mean, if you can prove what God says, then you are God, and you can't say that. That's not appropriate. So that's the view, but that's not the view of Buddha. Buddha does not assert a creator. So then you have to ask the question, and we don't ever follow this through. We don't usually think it through. The teachings to the Buddha, who revealed these ideas about karma, reincarnation, blah, 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 Buddhahood, and everybody laughed and probably was shocked when I said, would you ask Einstein, who revealed the teachings about relativity, etc., to him? Of course we wouldn't. So we've got to change our assumptions. And why wouldn't we? Because we know what we mean by science is something coming from a person who has observed with his own mind, their own mind, they've observed something, they've looked into it, they've analyzed as a law, and they present it and they say, this is what I have found to be true. So you'd never ask who revealed it to you. That you'd be laughed. We should laugh, what do you mean revealed? But that's the only option we've got if you posit a creator, isn't it? That's not the Buddha's view. So this takes us quite a while. Even as Buddhists, we always use the word belief. Or do I have to believe in reincarnation? We will. Do I have to believe in karma? We tend to think it's like, you can decide for yourself, which is what we think of as religion. But you can go along and kind of, cherry pick things and put it in your little kit bag and say, there's my religion. I believe in this and this and this, but I don't like this and don't like this. I mean, this is just like infantile. It's like nobody in science with any half a brain would talk like that. You've got to prove things to be true. And then, of course, we say, well, how can you prove? This comes down to what the mind is. So this is why we have to understand, if everything that is Buddhism that is valid has to have come from a direct observation of the person, a Buddha, and anybody since then who has followed his methodology and has you have to assert what the Buddha, the view of the mind is, because it's clearly not the brain. It's clearly not what we're discussing that we assert as the capability of the mind in the modern world. We assert the thing in the skull called the brain. That's synonymous with the word mind. Then we can see also there's no discussion, is there, that the brain can remember a past life. It sounds like it's hilarious to think that. It's not a possibility. It's not within the ability of the grosser consciousness, and I'm using this word very consciously. It's not within the capability of gross consciousness, which is the sensory consciousness. This is the Buddha's view. Gross consciousness, and this is coming from the Vajrayana model, actually. Grossest level of our capacity for cognition, if you like, is the sensory consciousness, which is very immediate. It's got to have something in front of it. It has no conceptuality. It doesn't have a memory, you know. Sensory is very direct and very limited. Eye consciousness, this is the Buddha's view, eye consciousness cognizes precisely two things, shape and color. Ear consciousness can only cognize sound. You know, tactile consciousness can only cognize touch, like smooth, rough, etc. It's very limited. We can agree with that. So then we have the other part of our mind, and Buddha would call that mental consciousness. So that the only level we tend to view as valid is our capacity for conceptuality, for thinking, for thoughts. Well, for the Buddha, he agrees, but this is the grossest level of our capacity to cognize. So, you know, taking this Vajrayana model, they talk about we have gross consciousness, subtle consciousness, and we have these, even what they call a spectrum of capability to the what they call literally extremely subtle consciousness. So subtle consciousness is, well, I mean, that's conceptuality. That's subtle for the Buddha. But we do posit that, and we talk about the brain. So really, you know, the only way, as I said, the only way, and this is not meant to insult neuroscientists, the only way to describe the function of the brain as far as the Buddha's view is concerned, of what goes on in consciousness, because the fundamental point for the Buddha, and the whole of Buddhism would collapse into a heap of absurd nonsense if we can prove that what Buddha is saying is wrong, that the consciousness in its nature isn't physical. It's not a function of the brain. I'm sure I mentioned this in one of the books I read by an American scientist when I was editing Lama Zopa's book about how to help at the time of death. And I read this book by an American scientist, and in all the problems, and I think I mentioned this, all the difficulties and problems in the modern, in the American anyway, scientific world, in relation in particular to the business of taking organs and then giving people organs. So when you take the organ from a dead person, you keep the person breathing, you know. So from the Buddhist point of view, they're alive. Consciousness is still there, which at a subtle level doesn't depend upon the brain. So this, of course, is not evident to us. If we observe a person who looks like they're dead, there's no breath, there's no heart movement, there's no brain movement. So that's what we mean by dead. Not for this view. Mind is still there, a subtler level. So this scientist, I mean, all the problems with people not sure when death is, now people coming back to life, there's always been, we've discussed this, I think I mentioned it, there's been reports of this for centuries in all the different cultures, people so-called coming back to life after they've been announced to be dead. So this one doctor, I mentioned this, I think he had a whole chapter, this man, about in this book, a whole chapter on what people call out-of-body experiences, you know. In other words, things that initially the scientific world are quite cynical about, because if you're brain dead, if you're fast asleep and unconscious under anesthetic, it's not possible that you can see things or hear things. But all these people reporting that seeing and hearing what was going on, they can't believe it, you know, but there's more and more evidence of this. And so as one doctor was reported, this is the point of my story here, who works in this industry, as he said, I can now say with certainty that consciousness is not a function of the brain. I don't know what it is, but that I can say. So this is marvelous that people are starting to question their assumptions, you know, and certainly with all these, as I've described this, said this many times as well, brains in the Tibetan Buddhist world, discussing what's the best brains in the modern world. Many of them so much published, you know, so many people now in the modern scientific world questioning their assumptions of what mind is, what consciousness is, coming from these discussions from the Buddhist. Incredible depth of nature over the centuries, you know, describing the mind as not physical, fundamental point, not physical.
Venerable Robina, I'm sorry, I hate to interrupt you. I just wanted to check. It seems you're skipping a lot. I don't know if there's anything you can do on your side about your internet.
Really? Okay, let me see what I can do. Okay. Let me have a look. Hang on.
Okay.
Well, I just tested it and it seems really strong. I just tested it. It seems extremely strong.
It looks, the bars are now white. So I think that's a good sign. Before they were yellow and red. So I don't know if anybody on the call has any other suggestions.
I just tested my link and that seemed very, very with me. Is it, can you hear me better now or not or what? I don't know.
You're still skipping a bit. I'll ask, does anybody else want to chime in?
I noticed that. Go ahead, Lou. I was going to say, I noticed that every once in a while I got an indication that Venerable Robina's bandwidth was low. And in that case, her picture would shrink into the middle of the screen.
Okay, well, I'm checking my bandwidth and it seems extremely strong. But let me see if I can get another, let me see if I can do something else. Hang on a minute.
I think the bandwidth is strong because the connection to the router is strong, but the router is having problems and it might need to be reset.
And I've had situations in the past where if people turn off the cameras, it actually helped the speaker because of how much Zoom takes up. Just a thought.
Is that better for you or not? I've got another connection.
Oh, well, it seems okay. It seems okay for now.
Okay.
Maddie says thumbs up.
Okay, let's see how it goes. So, okay, so the fundamental point I'm making here, and these various things I'm saying, is that the Buddha's view is mind isn't physical. That's it. Mind is not your brain. Mind is not physical. Mind depends upon the brain at a grosser level. There is no discussion about that. Nothing wrong with studying the brain, not trying to be insulting. But as far as the Buddha is concerned, it's not itself the brain. And of course, that would be very true, because if we can see the whole Buddhist view about the mind, how mind is beginningless and endless. This is the Mahayana view. This is the other characteristic about the mind. It isn't created. This is where it radically differs from the creator religions, and also indeed from the materialist view. We're not the handiwork of anyone else. This is a shocking concept. I mean, if you're a materialist, you think your mother and father made you. If you're a Christian, you think God made you. In either case, somebody is responsible for you. There's no view like that in Buddhism. This takes a while to think about. It's quite shocking. Buddha says, I'm sorry, you know, the mind is its own entity and it comes from previous moments of itself. It's being not physical. It's interconnected with the brain and with the body. And you got your body from your mummy and daddy, which came from the egg and sperm. No argument there. But your mind from the second before conception, where did it come from? from a previous moment of itself. It's a continuity of mental moments. They use the term mental continuum. So, of course, the one that's always confusing to us, because we all have the question, when did it begin? We want everything to have a first big bang moment, as His Holiness said in all his discussions with scientists. Big bang, no problem, just not the first big bang, that's all. This is a very shocking idea to us, to think that consciousness is a beginningless continuity of mental moments. Sounds, even as I say it, it sounds nutty. And we have to analyze, why is it so shocking to us? Why is that so shocking to us? Why is it shocking to us that we can't track our consciousness, our mind, our river of mental moments back to a first moment? We've got to, I mean, we all, because we so deeply assume there must be a first moment, we don't question that assumption. So if we're Christian or Muslim, of course, the first cause of everything is called God. And of course, if you're a naughty, wicked kid at school, you'll ask, excuse me, miss, where did God come from? You're not supposed to ask that question. Because, I mean, I know in the Christian teachings, there are these detailed discussions about how there indeed can be such a thing as a first cause that didn't itself have a cause. Well, the Buddha, the vast teachings in the Buddhist literature about the nature of impermanence, the nature of things that are impermanent, the things that are the product of cause and effect. By definition, you can't have a first cause. By definition, you can't have. I mean, that kind of blows our brains, you know, because we assume there has to be. We should look at that assumption. It's not rational, Buddha says. It's completely irrational. How can you possibly, if you assert the law of cause and effect, how can you posit a first cause, which immediately tells you that it itself didn't have a cause? This is simply not feasible. It's not viable. It's not possible. There's extensive teachings in Buddhism about this, not just trying to be clever, trying to prove the truth of it. But it's too shocking for us to think that our mind, I mean, is beginningless, which means we've had beginningless lifetimes, which means, is, you know, we've had lifetimes before this planet. It's just too much for our ridiculous mind to cope with. It's so fascinating. This is what Buddha's asserting. If we're interested in these things, we should think about it. So this is a very different view from the neuroscience, and a very different view from the Christian teachings, absolutely. I mean, Buddha's basically saying we don't need creating by some external force. We don't need a capital C creator. That sounds extremely shocking. I mean, that is like the worst sacrilege for the creative religions. It's like too shocking for words, you know. This is Buddha's view. It's all in there in the literature. And a lot of this is coming from these Hindus before him, these genius Indians that Buddha studied with, you know. So mind is not physical. Mind is a beginningless continuity of mental moments. Now, the different teachings in Buddhism, in the Hinayana teachings, you will learn that the mind will end. Once you've achieved your nirvana, once you've uprooted the root delusion by realizing emptiness and then perfecting that realization, at some point or other, in one life or other, you will have achieved your liberation from suffering and its causes, nirvana. And when you die in that life, you are gone, like out, you're out like a puff of smoke. You're gone, you're finished. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, we Mahayanas have a problem with that. The Mahayana view is very different, that consciousness never ends, you know. And the other radically different point, of course, is the Buddha's view of what is possible for this mind of ours. What is our capability? What is our potential? And that's when the Mahayana view says that every mind just naturally possesses the potential to be rid of all delusions, and that's implied by the syllable Buddha. And then the second syllable da, Buddha, the second syllable implies the development to perfection of all the goodness. So basically, Buddha's this is pointing exactly to Buddha's analysis of what the mind is, what it is made up of. The mental consciousness made up of negative, positive, and neutral states. And the job of being a Buddhist is to recognize and identify and eventually unpack and unravel and eventually get rid of completely all the neurotic, deluded, misconception states of mind that are the cause of all our suffering, the cause of why we harm others, but which Buddha has found from his own experience are not at the core of our being and thus can be removed. But not only that, the Mahayana view says we can also perfect, to literally develop to perfection all the other parts of our mind, the valid parts of our mind, love and compassion and wisdom and so on. And when we've done this job, that's what a Buddha is, you know. So, I mean, this is all discussing the mind. All this is implied by what the mind is. So, of course, we can't prove this immediately. You can't prove anything immediately. You can't even prove 1 + 1 is 2. You have to learn the theory first, then you understand it, then you have an experience of it. Everything is like that. So your approach to it, just like if you wanted to prove that Einstein is true, you have to start with 1 + 1 is 2 and then move through the different sciences, don't you? So initially you take it as your working hypothesis. That's the best way. It's the way I always say it. I never say, oh, I believe in Buddhism. Believing in something is intellectual laziness. Merely believing is intellectual laziness. It's just kind of cheap and easy. Oh, I believe in that. Yeah, I like that. I'll believe in that. It's absurd. It's like laughable. You'd be laughed out of the room if you said you believed in mathematics. I mean, you could manage to believe in mathematics. You get away with it. Enough people know it, so you can work it out. But like I always say, something as simple as your mother saying, go buy me 7 oranges, you won't be able to do that because you don't know how to count. You don't know what math is. So believing in it is ridiculous. But that's how we think of religion, you know, not for the Buddha. It's just intellectual laziness. And it's useless. It won't help you. So to engage in this, and to experience the truth of these things that Buddha's saying, basically, is what being a Buddhist means. What is a musician? A musician is a person who's bought into Bach's theories and then made them their own theories until eventually you've proved them for yourself by becoming another Bach. I mean, it's hardly rocket science. Everything's like that. All knowledge is like that, you know. So you've got to do it. Start with a theory. And this is what I always say too. Any body of knowledge, if it is valid, whether it's math, music, you know, classical music, whether it's cooking, acupuncture, whatever it is, a body of knowledge, if it is a valid body of knowledge, if it is valid, then first it has to be intellectually coherent. First, it has to be coherent intellectually. First. And that's how we understand that in our world of science and music and art and math and so on. We understand that. But as soon as it comes to religion, we have these other weird ideas, you know. It's very fascinating. So, okay, your mind is not physical. It is not the handiwork of a creator. It doesn't need creating. It's beginningless and endless. And it's got this marvelous potential, and the job of being a Buddhist then is to achieve this potential. You know, the first reason to achieve it is because, you know, you're sick of suffering. So one way of framing this entire view of Buddhism is in terms of its being a method to how to stop suffering and how to get happy. And that's absolutely to do with, every second of that's to do with the mind. Understanding what are the causes of suffering, what is suffering, what are its causes, and what is happiness and what are its causes. That's your job, and all that job is done by the mind. So then all of this too is implying the law of karma, the law of cause and effect, this law that, as far as Buddha is concerned, his own observation, runs the universe. The universe runs within this law. It's the law that relates to the happiness and suffering of sentient beings, because that's what makes up universes. All of this is the Buddhist approach, the Buddhist teachings, the Buddhist worldview, and it all comes down to the mind, because it all plays out in the mind. Suffering is created by the mind. Happiness is created by the mind. Ignorance is in the mind. Wisdom is in the mind. So we need to develop wisdom, give up ignorance. To get happy, give up suffering. They all come to the same thing. And it's all done by the mind. So as we've been talking, if you study the mind in more depth, you will study the epistemological model of the mind, which is the way mind functions. And this is utterly, utterly fascinating, I tell you. The texts are extensive in describing the way mind functions. It's fascinating. And I think all modern scientists would be delighted to study it. But you have to, be proposing the possibility that you're not discussing the brain here. It's totally fascinating. So as we've discussed, one of the things you learn when you discuss how the mind functions is you distinguish between the way the mind functions. And one way the mind functions is sensory consciousness, and the other way the mind functions is mental consciousness. And I've discussed this, but let's look at it again. This is vital to understand. The mind, you've got two different ways the mind cognizes. One is through the medium of the body, through the medium of the sensory consciousness. Your sensory consciousness is that part of your mind, remember, which isn't physical, that functions through the medium of the eyeball, the eardrum, and the nerves, the tactile. There's 5, as we know. So that's that part of the eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, tactile consciousness. These are the 5 parts of our mind, which aren't physical, that function specifically through the medium of the different parts of the physical in order to have a cognition. So I'll use the same example. I might say that's a very pretty mala. I'll say that to you. And I would say that to you. It's my mala and I'm very attached to it. My nice pearl mala. So when I say to you that is a really nice mala, usually it'll be the visual one, but also even the tactile, the visual, when I look at it, my eye consciousness cognizes, the shiny, and it's very appealing. Also, even the tactile for me is quite pleasing as well. So then we naturally assume that I am seeing a very pretty mala, that I am touching a very pleasant mala. But the senses, they're not that capable. This is a very big shock. And this, I tell you, we could spend the rest of the evening just on this topic. This really points to the way our mind works, and for the Buddha, the incredible mistakes we make, the power we give to our sensory consciousnesses that they literally do not have. We make the body the boss, as Lama Yeshe puts it. This is profoundly true, and it's utterly mistaken. This leads us up garden paths. This is so profound, actually. Let's look into this more. I swear to you, it's very fascinating. So we naturally assume my eyes are seeing a very pretty mala. Well, Buddha says, don't be ridiculous. It's not, the eye consciousness does not have that capability. All the sensory consciousnesses can only cognize a few objects. The way they talk about mind is the subject. Every moment of mind is the subject, if you like, and it always has an object. Whatever level of mind is functioning, it always has an object that it cognizes. Cognition is the job of the mind. So the mind is, the definition of mind, there's usually 2 parts in a definition. The first part of anything, and the first part tells you its conventional characteristics. So here, the definition, the first part of the definition, the conventional characteristics of the mind, they say are its clarity, which means it's not physical, it's non-physicality. The second part of the definition tells you the job of that thing. So, like a thermos. What is a cup? A cup is a flat-bottomed clay container. That's its conventional characteristics. That helps you identify it. But then what does it do? This is the crucial piece. What is a cup? What does it do? What's its meaning? What's its function? What's its job? It holds your tea. Blah, blah, blah. So mind is that which is clear, meaning not physical, and then that which cognizes. That's its job. So to cognize, the verbs to cognize, to know, to be aware, these are all synonyms. And these are the job of your mind. So of course you have to ask you're begging to ask the next question. Well, Buddha, cognize what? Well, guess what, honey? Cognize that which exists. This is the job of all of us, is to get our minds to be in sync with reality, get our minds to be in sync with that which exists. Because right now, Buddha's saying parts of our mind, and that's our mental consciousness, are cognizing things that don't exist. They're driven by all the delusions, which is why we suffer. So the sensory consciousness, eye consciousness, for example, what does it cognize? Well, it can only cognize 2 things, shape and color. It can't know that that is blue, but it's the object of its cognition. and then the shape. That's all eye consciousness is capable of cognizing. But we think it's cognizing a pretty mala, a beautiful blue with pearl mala with blue beads or something, you know. No, this is profound. So what you got to then ask the question, well, if my eye consciousness is not cognizing a pretty mala, what part of my mind is doing that cognizing? Well, honey child, that is your mental consciousness. We have sensory consciousness and we have mental consciousness. So your mental consciousness, that's, as Lama Zopa puts it, that's where the workshop is. That's where all the thoughts, opinions, ideas, viewpoints, all your emotions, your intellectual thoughts, your subtler thoughts, your unconscious, subconscious, all of this is your mental consciousness. So you could say it's like this because we're so programmed to, you know, so programmed in the way we cognize things from much habit over countless lifetimes. The millisecond my eye consciousness sees this shape and color, and because that millisecond, quicker than Google, and that's not joking, my mental consciousness is accessed. And what's that? That's where the workshop is. That's where all my memories are. That's where all the concepts are. That's where, and that's so the mental consciousness, it itself, that has two ways it functions. And this you learn as well when you study the texts. Mental consciousness has a grosser level of cognizing, and that level is the only level we function at, which is conceptuality, thoughts about things. That's the only level of cognition we have that we think of as the capability of the brain, you know, besides the sensory. Now, we know we don't have the capability, you know, we talk about, oh no, who can remember a past life? We think it's a joke. Well, I'm sorry, don't be ridiculous. You know, even 30 minutes after I got up this morning, if you asked me to account for every millisecond of what I'd experienced in that 30 minutes, I'd be a miserable failure, because that gross level of conceptuality, which is gross consciousness, doesn't have that capacity. We don't think that's surprising. Well, that's just plain ignorance and idiocy for the Buddha, because we've got the capacity for astonishing levels of cognition, and that's called subtle consciousness. We use the Vajrayana model. So we have the capacity at subtler levels of cognition beyond the sensory, beyond the mental, which we access when we've accomplished that amazing psychological skill that the genius Indians well before the Buddha invented, called single-pointed concentration. We can get to a subtler level of mental consciousness beyond the sensory, beyond conceptuality. So first of all, the first point, sensory and mental, completely different. Because we've been so many lifetimes embodied beings, and embodied beings have sensory consciousness, we give so much more power to our senses than they actually have. And this is what leads us up garden paths. This is huge if we begin to think about it. So mental consciousness is where the workshop is. All the thoughts, the feelings, the emotions, the dramas, and at the level we function at, they are all thoughts, concepts. Now, this is beyond shocking to us. If we see a person angry, shouting, spit coming out of their mouth, eyes wide, irrational words coming out of their mouth, you know, we would say, oh, look at that, the person's angry. So how do you know? You're just seeing you're seeing a physical experience. You're hearing irrational words. That's not anger. That's just the physical indicator that the person has got angry thoughts. Think about this. We give the power to the body. That's why we don't have a clue what's going in people's minds. The best we can do is do by some kind of physical indication. If they smile, if they cry, we have a vague notion of what's going on in their mind. We haven't got a clue, even our own mind, because we're so addicted to the senses, so addicted to the physical, the body. In fact, that's why our biggest problem, as we've been talking, of really beginning to do the job of being a Buddhist, which is to unpack and unravel our conceptual thoughts that inform our emotions, we don't get anywhere near that because we don't notice what we're thinking and feeling until the body expresses something. So because we give so much power to the body, it's so limited, it's so limiting, you know. So sensory consciousness isn't mental. Sensory is just bare bones capacity for to get certain indications about things. The rest is the mental consciousness. Then we live at the gross level, the level of conceptuality. So anger is in the mind of that person you see shouting and spitting and being irrational and punching and kicking, you know. Their mind. And what is anger? It's a series of concepts. What is anger saying? We can tell by what the person says. It's hardly rocket science. How dare you do that to me? You are the cause of all my suffering. I will kill you. I hate you. That's what anger is saying. And where's that coming from? Your mental consciousness. The body's expressing a lot of things, but anger's not the body. Anger's the mind. And what level? Not sensory, it's mental. What level of mental? Conceptuality. This is the level we function at. So we've got to do the work of unpacking and unraveling our conceptuality, unpacking and unraveling all these crazy conceptual thoughts. And that's where we begin to learn about the mental consciousness, which is the model of the mind that we're describing here, how the mind functions, the mental consciousness, and what are its contents. So here we now learn the psychological model of the mind, the workshop. And what are the thousands, all the thoughts and feelings and emotions we have, Buddha categorizes them into precisely 3 groups. Those that are neurotic, delusional, ridiculous, disturbing, distressing, rooted in fear, and a load of rubbish, not in sync with reality by definition. This is so shocking to hear. They're made up nonsense. They're not in touch with reality. And as Lama Zopa puts it, you know, what appears out there back to the mind. Lama Yeshe talks about in Mahamudra how the mind is like a mirror and it reflects whatever's arising. So whatever's out there, however it reflects back here to the mind, in the mirror of our mind, it appears, as they say in Buddhist psychology, in the aspect of whatever is in your mind. So the mind is angry. Wake up one morning, it is irritated. Everything appears ugly, doesn't it? If you're waking up all happy and joyful, everything appears not too bad. It's so obvious, but we don't join the dots. Because why? Because of the root delusion in the mind, the root misconception, the root nonsense known as ignorance, ma rigpa, that totally believes there is an intrinsic, real, solid me having an intrinsic, real, solid experience of an intrinsic, real, solid thing out there. This is the killer. This is how the deluded states of mind function. This is how they cause us suffering and have been doing since beginningless time, Buddha says. Then you've got the virtuous states of mind that are reasonably valid. And then you have the mechanics of the mind. That's my term. Concentration, good memory. Whether you're a murderer or a meditator, you need these third lot, you know. You need to have good concentration, good memory, good discrimination, a proper intention, proper attention, all these different discrimination. Many of these terms, these are like the mechanics. They're neither virtuous nor non-virtuous in their character. This is the Buddha's analysis of the contents of our mental consciousness. You know, it's completely not the way we talk about in neuroscience. So if you want to understand Buddhism, you need to understand what Buddha means by the mind and how it functions. It's the absolute bare bones root of the entire path to enlightenment, you know. So any questions? Yes. Richard, talk to me.
Oh, hi, Robina. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I have a quick question for you. I'm wondering, you know, I know compassion is really important with Buddhism, but, you know, maybe because I'm kind of new back at it, you know, it's like I'm going around with my brain when I see somebody getting something terrible happen to them.
That's right.
It's almost like, okay, well, you must have deserved it because you did something to them prior. And sometimes I don't feel bad anymore. Is what I used to. I don't know. Is that common or is that?
So, okay, so let's unpack that assumption. There's a series of assumptions there, Richard. Let's analyze.
Okay.
So first of all, there's an assumption there that if a person is innocent and they get kicked by somebody and they're innocent, which means they didn't do anything to deserve it, then that's the only person you're going to have compassion for, isn't it? That's the assumption, isn't it? That's an assumption we have, that our compassion is only for those who are innocent. Do you get my point here?
Oh, totally.
So the second you've just discovered the Buddha's view, that in one sense, there's no innocent victim. We've all got countless lives. We all have happiness and we all have suffering. So the law of karma, which is the natural law that runs in the minds of all beings, says that every moment of happiness we all have, we created the cause for it. Equally, every moment of suffering we have, we created the cause for it. Now, of course, if we hear that we created the cause for happiness, we don't really pay much attention. We don't care, because we just think, give me more happiness, please. I don't care if we deserve it or not. But the second we hear that we might dare to deserve, quote unquote, a bad thing to happen, we go, oh, well, then they deserve it. Let them suffer. That's our view, isn't it, Richard?
Yeah, wrong view.
Those are the assumptions, honey, we've got to look at. The Buddha's telling us every being in the universe has had countless lifetimes. Every being in the universe wants happiness and doesn't want suffering. Every being in the universe is completely locked into the suffering of not knowing that they're the cause of their own happiness and own suffering, and run around blaming everybody else for their happiness and everybody else for their suffering. And that just keeps increasing our suffering. So we're living in this utter nightmare of terrible ignorance. And that alone is the basis of having unbelievable compassion for everybody. So it's a very, very, very different view. We've got to unpack it and look at it very carefully.
That's a good point. Thank you very much.
You with me? You with me?
Yep.
Okay. Because we have a very deep assumption that things happen unfairly, don't we? We think, you see, I think our view, without really analyzing it, if we are materialists, especially if we're philosophical materialists, which is the view that seems to prevail in the world these days, you know, many marvelous things about science, but the view tends to be, well, I didn't ask to get born, therefore it's not my fault, therefore things happen fairly. I mean, things are like good luck and bad luck. That's how we actually believe it. It's good luck if something happens to you, and it's bad luck if something unhappy happens to you. We don't know why. We don't have many, I mean, we might have proven lots of things in the scientific world, but we haven't proven why bad things happen to good people. We haven't proven why good things happen to bad people. We haven't proven so many things. We just go, oh, well, we haven't proved that yet. Or we will say, oh, nobody knows the answer to that. We have all these ignorant types of views, you know. So, I mean, Buddha's demanding, if we want to question all these assumptions. As far as Buddha's concerned, there's a coherent way the world works. There's a law that runs the universe, and it's possible to understand everything that exists. That's Buddha's view, which is quite a shocking concept. And if the law of karma is logical, and if it's a law, it is logical and it is coherent, then there must be logic to everything that happens. This is Buddha's view, which is quite shocking to us. So if we're interested in how he assesses everything, we need to learn what he is saying and then see if we can find out whether that's true or not.
So in a way, Jesus might have been a Buddhist as well, because, you know, forgive. I mean, you know, if somebody I remember in your book you wrote in that PDF that if you get punched in the face, then you want to punch back, and then the wheels go round and round, that, you know, do unto others and that kind of stuff. So yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense, because, you know, it's kind of like what is weakness to the ego is the only true strength, you know. Yeah.
Okay.
I see what you're saying, totally.
Good, Richard. No, there's a lot, if we want to think of it carefully, there's a lot to unpack, because a lot of the assumptions are just very, very different. And that's up to us, Richard, isn't it? The extent to which we want to look into the meaning of all these things and find out for ourselves if if these are valid concepts to have about the world, isn't it? It's up to us very much, isn't it?
My friend would like to ask you a question.
Hello there.
This is a situation that I'm in.
Yeah.
I was married for a number of years, and I destroyed the marriage with my own behavior and in addiction.
Yeah.
And I'm remarried, and my wife now that I'm with, the 3.5 years in the last year, has had mental health issues. And to be honest with you, it's been very difficult, and she's been very angry. And for me, I mean, I'm wondering if this would be fit with the Buddhist view, is that the suffering that I feel I've gone through in the last year or so is kind of payback for my own misbehavior in the previous marriage. But this is this lifetime, not in another lifetime.
No, I understand. What's your name?
Dean Fogger.
Dean.
Yeah.
I understand, Dean. I mean, this one you could say like that, but in a way, you know, it's not really the bigger meaning of the view of karma, because karma isn't only just about suffering. It's Buddha's very detailed, quite technical explanation of why moment by moment things happen, not just like a big stick that's used to whack you to pay you back for some bad thing. Karma is as much referring to every millisecond. I mean, in Dean's life, if you can analyze and you start making a list, Dean, I bet you're going to have a long, long list, for example, of all the really good things that have happened to you. Would that be true?
Absolutely, yes. I've had.
If you look into your own, and again, if you look into your own mind, you're going to see lots of good qualities. You're intelligent, you've got empathy, you're a good man, you try to be ethical, you're doing your best to sort of turn yourself into a good human being. These are all the fruit of your past positive actions. But we only need to think of all this in terms of the negative ones, which is a very narrow-minded, very small way of doing it, because we have this bit of an addiction to punishment and reward, you know. But the Buddha has no view like punishment and reward. It's like if you eat sugar, you don't get punished by getting you know, diabetes. It's just a natural consequence of eating sugar. You get my point here? So that's more the way to ask about karma. So you could say but the bigger part here is, you know, it's been a very powerful experience for you. You're trying to have patience, you're trying to be loving, you're trying to be kind. So one other approach to all this is whatever arises in our life. Yes, it's all due to karma, but then there's some kind of something we can learn from it all, you know. And secondly, you've got this relationship with this particular woman. She's having real struggles now. And that's where we have to learn to know, is this relationship valid? Should I continue? Can I really help? What can I do about it? They're the better things to think about, Dean.
Okay, thank you.
That
helps.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robina.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you, Richard.
Appreciate it.
Who else is there? Any other questions? Anybody? Maddie, yes.
Yes, thank you, Venerable Robina. You were talking about the subtle cognition, and I was wondering if we're fortunate enough to really be able to train that subtle cognition, is that enough to move us through, say, the death of an organ donor?
What do you mean by move us through? I don't understand.
Like, can if I'm able to cognize on the subtlest degree and change my cognition and really kind of work with that, should I be, is that enough to be able to die a death where I'm like being cut open and having my guts removed?
I don't understand the question at all, man. I'm really sorry. I don't get the point.
I'm really sorry. I don't know if I have the wisdom to ask the question the way to ask the question in a way that makes sense. I'm not sure I do.
I don't understand it at all. I mean, the real point about subtle consciousness is that it's a level of mind that we eventually begin to cultivate, to access, if you like, when we've got single-pointed concentration, that brilliant psychological technique known as shamatha, calm abiding, this brilliant technique invented by the Indians well before the Buddha, this ability to have super subtle, super focused concentration that enables you to completely still the conceptuality, literally go beyond the sensory consciousness as well, to access this more subtle, more refined, more capable, more focused level of consciousness that isn't depending on the brain and that isn't sensory or conceptual. We can't even posit such a thing in modern science. There's no such thing existing. It just sounds like science fiction to us. But this is the crucial point to understand. So when you've accessed through single-pointed concentration, that more subtle level of mind, you'll have various experiences. One of them, a very clear one, is called clairvoyance. That level of mind, which is more subtle and more powerful, necessarily can cognize phenomena that the grosser level, the sensory and the conceptuality, can't cognize. We can't see the minds of others. We don't see the past. We can't see the future. This is the capability of mind at a more subtle level when it is totally focused. We can do more than that. We can eventually use this subtle focused level of mind to do the real unpacking and unraveling at a most subtle level, in order to literally realize emptiness and achieve Buddhahood. I mean, this is that we need to, that's the real point about the subtle mind. So if you're asking the question, if I are able to access the subtle mind, could I go through the death process with consciousness? Is that what you're saying? What do you mean?
I think you answered my question without me even having to really make sense of it.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
But in the long term, we absolutely need to access this subtle level of mind, because that level of mind is the only level of cognition that's capable of doing the really subtle work of unpacking and unraveling the mind at a deeper level, to get to remove from the mind all the nonsense, to see reality as it is and achieve the enlightened mind, to achieve, even just to, I mean, that's in the long term, we need to get that to do the job that Buddha says we're capable of.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Venerable Robina.
Yeah. Yes, Lou.
If the mind is endless, if you achieve Buddhahood, are you reborn? And where are you reborn?
Good point, Lou. Okay. So in your progress, as Lou is going through his progress from being an ordinary, unconscious, deluded, ridiculous person who's always suffering and is always a victim and blaming everybody else and getting reborn and having more suffering and more misery and getting more angry and more miserable. Look at the world, let's face it. When we begin to become conscious, it's this gradual process of first, as we've all been talking, controlling the servants of your mind. The very first level of practice is abide by the laws of karma. Don't kill, don't steal, don't lie. Control the servants of your crazy delusion. Stop killing, stop lying, stop stealing, stop harming. Why? Because everything we think and do and say programs our mind that will ripen as our future suffering and future happiness. So the very first level of practice is to recognize I don't want further suffering. I'm up to here with suffering. I'm sick of suffering. So we begin to start to program the mind by giving up harming others, which are the main cause of suffering. We start to program our mind in, at least when we die, we're going to get another happy rebirth. So then we can continue the work, and then we start to really work on our mind and get deeper and deeper and become our own therapist and unpack and unravel our minds and identify the attachment and the anger and all the neuroses that are the cause of my pain and the cause of why I harm others. And we start to really change those and become more loving and more kind and more virtuous and more wise. And then we go to the compassion wing, where we now proactively start to really want to develop incredible, unparalleled levels of love and compassion and wisdom. And eventually we completely rid the mind of all the rubbish. We develop to perfection all the goodness, and we become this so-called Buddha. So, because one of the key functions now is that you are completely in control. You're not no longer thrown from pillar to post by the winds of karma. You're in control of the whole damn process now. And so because you now no longer need to be reborn, you've cut all the roots of all the rubbish suffering, but because you've got such compassion, you only want to be reborn. So you choose to be reborn life after life after life to be of benefit to others, but you're in complete control of the process. And it's driven by incredible compassion and wisdom. But choose it.
So when you're reborn as a Buddha, you have cognition of your past
Total
lives,
awareness.
and you can
Total awareness, and you can manifest in many bodies. You can do it. You're really in charge of the whole process now. Yeah, that's exactly right, Lou. That's right, exactly. Anybody else?
Thank you, Venerable.
Good, pleasure. Thank you. Any other questions, folks? Any other questions?
I have a question, Venerable Robina.
Yes.
This is Burke.
Hello, Burke.
It's about something you said at the end of last week's teaching that I just wasn't able to ask you then. Yeah. You're talking about indifference as couldn't care.
Yeah.
And it occurred to me that I'd never heard anyone describe the antidote to indifference. So what is the antidote to indifference?
That's a really good point. That's a good point. Let's look at it. Okay, let's look at it. This is a particular approach that's taken if we look into the compassion wing. So let's look into the compassion wing, and maybe that was the way the opening into this. So we're still working. In the first stages of practice, you're mainly controlling your body and your speech. You're abiding by the laws of karma. You're living in vows. You do lots of purification. You try to discipline yourself. You don't kill. You don't steal. You don't lie. Then you start to have more control, more discipline. You don't, you start to really be in charge of your body and speech. Then you get to the next level of practice where you really start to be in charge of your mind. You unpack and unravel your mind. You start to really lessen attachment and anger and neuroses and grow your goodness and love and wisdom. Then you get to the compassion wing. And so, okay, now the first two stages of practice, the wisdom wing, you're the main beneficiary of this. Everything is related to you subduing your body, your speech, and your mind, because you're fed up with suffering and you want happiness. And that's exactly the result you get. Because as you get less neurotic and less harmful and less attached and less angry, you get more happy, more content, more fulfilled, but naturally more loving and more empathetic. This is just natural, So now you get to the compassion wing where you want to proactively start to really grow the virtues and continue to lessen the delusions. But the emphasis here is on helping others, on wanting to be of benefit to others. So the way we work on the mind in this approach is in reference to others. So that's where we look into this very first level of practice, which is the beginning of the development of these incredible levels of love and compassion and great compassion, which culminate in bodhicitta, blah, blah, blah. The very first practice is to try to develop this equanimity. So equanimity here is this very specific, heartfelt recognition that so-called friend, enemy, and stranger. And what we're going to find is there's no fourth category in the universe, because these are the three objects in terms of sentient beings of the three poisons. An object of attachment in this way we're describing are people, sentient beings who do what my attachment want. We have attachment for certain people, like our pussycat, our wife, maybe our child, whoever, our beloved new girlfriend, whatever. So we have enormous attachment for them. They appear delicious. So they're the ones that we preoccupy our lives with, and they're the ones that we do happen to have some love and some compassion for. In fact, we do have love and compassion, but it's almost exclusively for that category. So as soon as I leave you, your beloved girlfriend, for a younger version, your love and compassion, we know this, will turn off like a tap, and I will leave the friend category and go to the enemy category. I'm this horrible ex-girlfriend. I harmed you. I left you. I'm mean. I'm this. And how do you feel about me now? You have aversion for me. And it's a proactive state of mind. You think of me. You can't stand to think about my name. You see me. You hear about me. I make you angry. So when you're in love with me and I do what your attachment wants, I'm your friend. That's attachment energy. When I stop doing what your attachment wants, I go into the enemy category. I mean, you get my point, right? You with me? The world does this. Now, that's friends and enemies. They're a very small percentage of the people we even think about on this planet. The few people we adore and the few people we hate or dislike. They could be the politicians. They could be certain animals. Now, the 99.999% are the beings who have neither harmed nor helped us that we can remember. So how do we feel about them? They don't even enter into our consciousness. We have complete, total indifference. We don't even see them. You get my point? That's indifference. So you could argue this is the method, this is the starting point to begin to get equanimity, is the exact perfect response to lessen not just attachment and aversion, but also not just the indifference, but also to lessen the attachment and aversion and stop seeing the world through the lenses of attachment, which means the person looks divine, which means I love them and want them to be happy and think about them all the time. And then the person who doesn't do what I want, I don't like them and wish they would suffer. And the third lot, I couldn't care less. So you could say that a direct antidote to attachment, you could argue, I mean, in the most basic level, in the earlier stages of practice, the really fundamental approach, the antidote to attachment is to kind of calm the mind down and not get too excited. The main antidote, you could say, to anger is to try and see some good qualities. And the main antidote to indifference, I think would be the same thing, really. But the real point here is when you're trying to get equanimity, this is the perfect antidote to calming down both attachment and aversion as well as indifference. In other words, you start to remove those from your mind, and then you start to realize that these three people not being seen through the lenses of your needs, suddenly you see they all want to be happy, they all don't want to suffer, and you gradually start to see them more equally. That's the approach here. So a direct antidote to indifference would be to get past is to have love. I mean, you'd have to say that's the only one. But here, it's a very gradual process of starting to stop these three extreme labels, all based on whether or not a person fulfills my needs. So if a person fulfills my needs, I adore them. If they actively don't fulfill my needs, if they actively go the opposite, then I have anger towards them. And then I just simply couldn't care about the third lot. So I don't know. That's the best I can say. What do you think? Helpful?
That's great. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, enough? That's it? Good. Okay. So people, what else? I mean, what else? So much else. Always so much else.
Venerable Robina.
Yes.
Sorry, we had one raised hand from Andrew.
Okay, good, Andrew. Talk to me.
Hi. I have a question about joyful effort.
Okay.
I've heard it's a bit off topic, I understand, but
Okay.
I've heard you talk a lot about joyful effort, and I can really relate to that with the things that I love to do in my life.
Okay.
How does one bring that into actions that don't bring you pleasure necessarily?
Exactly. This is a really, really tough one, Andrew. It's a totally relevant question, actually. Because we're so totally driven by attachment, I mean to degrees of subtlety that we can't even see right now. Really, it's so primordial. It totally drives everything. And so we know the only time we get joy from doing something is if we're attached to it. It's almost a default. It's a default assumption, isn't it? So that's why. What do you think depression is, Andrew? You know, when you've stopped finding things or people or events that give you any joy anymore, everything is just kind of like this terrible, dull. It's like indifference, but it's actually aversion. Things look awful. I mean, this goes to incredibly subtle levels. This is what depression is, when you can no longer think of anything to make you all perky and excited. I mean, second by second, this is happening. So to try and get enthusiasm to do things that take effort really demands a lot of real careful analysis. So even just using the ordinary example of, let's say you got to go to the gym, we can see this. We're so addicted to our comfort zone. This is the deepest attachment of all. We just want to be comfortable. So you start to think, okay, I'd like to go to the gym. And then why? Because you look at all these other people who've got nice muscle tone. They've lost a lot of weight. They look healthy. They run better. They breathe better. And they just look delicious. You know, so you go, okay, and so this is the thing that the Lamas say. And of course, the enthusiastic perseverance we're describing here is in your practice, which is really another whole level of discussion. But this is the point. So the only way you're going to be enthusiastic about going to the gym is if you can really see the benefits. So the benefit has to be long-term. It has to be long-term, because there's no benefit in coming home, because you're going to feel, after the gym, you feel exhausted. Your body has got more pain than you could imagine. So if you didn't understand that pain was a good sign, it's part of the sign of your progress in losing weight and getting fit, you'd give it up immediately. And that's exactly why we give it up, Andrew. This is an ordinary samsaric activity. So you've got to have some long-term view to understand the benefit of why you come home puffing and panting with aching muscles, because you know it's a gradual process of losing the pounds and getting fit and toning your muscles so that eventually you will look like that picture you visualize every day. That takes and that's samsara. Look how much effort that takes. So the Lamas would all say you've got to know the benefits of doing something. So ordinary life is so obviously like this. You've got to know the benefits of why you have to work 18 hours a day, because you know the benefit of money. I mean, technically, this is not even enthusiastic perseverance, because it's just samsara and there's no benefit to it. But we can even understand the process. You've got to think about the benefit. I mean, if you're if you haven't got much intelligence, You can't think about the long-term goal of anything. So you just sit in your stupor and eat and sleep and go to the toilet until you die. That's about it. And that's really the way Buddha's describing how most of us live our lives, because the attachment to comfort is more than for sex, drugs, rock and roll or anything. It's just this incredible inertia to be comfortable. So it prevents us from doing anything. It prevents us from achieving any goal whatsoever. Do you understand? So you've got to know the benefits of it. You've got to know the benefits. If you don't know the benefits of it, why would you want to do it? That means you have to have some intelligence that can see it's a process, that initially it's difficult, because by definition, effort is what's necessary to accomplish something you don't know how to do. And anything you don't know how to do necessarily takes effort. So you've got to know the benefits. If you don't know the benefits, you'll give up. That's why most of us fail in most things. I'm so sorry. So let's analyze what we're really meaning about enthusiasm or joyful effort or perseverance. They're all coming to the same thing. Of course, in the framework that it's taught, which is the final stages of the 6 perfections of the Bodhisattva, it's only talking about enthusiasm about developing your mind, enthusiasm about developing love and compassion, enthusiasm in the difficulties that you're going to face in the becoming of a Buddha. This is really advanced stuff, Andrew. I mean, it's exhausting, we know. I mean, if something doesn't give us pleasure almost immediately, we can't stand it. So we've got to have such an intelligent view and understand the long term and understand the benefit to oneself of being less angry, less attached, less jealous, less lazy, less depressed, more kind, more wise. And that is incredibly difficult to see the benefits of that. You've got to have very strong imprints of tendencies to want to be a good ethical person. You've got to see the benefits. It's just necessarily difficult to go against the grain, in other words. So you've got to know the benefits, and then you've got to persevere, knowing that there will be results. So you can still kind of have it like a carrot on a stick. That's okay. You can be skillful. The Lamas always talk about that. Don't feel bad about that. They even talk about how, we've got to see the benefits, first of all, in the first stages, to me, of giving up killing, lying, stealing. I will be the beneficiary. In our culture, we feel a bit guilty about that, thinking that sounds selfish, but that's really misunderstanding. It's expecting us to be too high. You've got to you've got to convince, you've got to give yourself a reason and there's nothing wrong with thinking of the benefits to yourself of being a moral, good person. This is profound. It's marvelous to think that. And then even more advanced, I remember when I first heard the teachings about bodhicitta, this outrageous shift in the mind where only you ever think of others. This almost seems insane. I couldn't get my head around it. And I remember the Dalai Lama saying it, it blew my mind. It was so helpful. And they talk like this. If you want to benefit others, practice compassion. If you want to benefit yourself, practice compassion. So part of the process from equanimity to gradually developing love, compassion, great compassion, this series of techniques that culminate in this outrageous shift in the mind where you only think of others, which is bodhicitta, which is so advanced. Part of the process is seeing the benefits to yourself of being self-centered, the disadvantages to yourself of being self-centered, the advantages to yourself of thinking of others. It's not inferior. We're at that level now. We have to hear the benefits. Otherwise, nothing will ever drive us. It's just too high, You understand, Andrew?
Yeah, I do. It makes a lot of sense. But you're already starting to talk about where the next question will lead me, is then dividing between the negative selfishness and the helpful selfish.
But that all comes earlier when you do the nuts and bolts in the first stages of practice. You abide by the laws of karma. You don't kill and steal and lie. You become a very ethical person. And right there, you have to see, and this is the thing I think that it starts to happen, this view of seeing the benefits to yourself. This is something we miss. one of Buddha's key points right at the beginning, when he exhorts us not to kill and lie and steal. It sounds like, oh, I've got to be a good person. I'll get rewarded in the future if I don't kill and don't steal, which of course is the view. If you have faith in a creator, you will be rewarded. And if you are naughty, you'll get punished. Not that view at all. The Buddha's point, forget about even long term, forget even about reincarnation and long-term results of what we do. The Buddha's getting us to try and see right now, Andrew, the advantages to me this second of not being angry. If we can't see that, we will never, ever be able to see the logic of not being angry, because we just think it's justifiable. But if we can see in ourselves the harm that I do myself this second by being angry and shouting, who do you think, even if I'm on my own at home and there's not another soul around and I'm angry at the television, I'm angry at the news and I'm shouting to myself, who in the name of God in heaven is going to suffer from that anger? You yourself. If we can see this, we're on the right track of seeing the benefit of virtue to me, the disadvantage of anger to me. And you've got to get past all that kind of, I'm allowed to be angry, look what they did to me, that vindictive self-pity we have. So this is already profound. It is logical that we are the beneficiaries of being more virtuous and more kind. It sounds holy, but what's the advantage? Your mind is happy. It's so logical, but we just have to get past it to see this. So simple. This is at the very first stages of practice.
Does the same go for depression? Because I feel like it's easy for me to identify the more colorful emotions, happiness, anger, blah, 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 blah. And then understanding very much how, through my practice and my perspective, how to handle those things. But I've always had this neutral place where it can easily become a depressive stupor because I'm not feeling either of those things and I don't know what to do.
Well, this is kind of interesting, Andrew, because actually, psychologically, depression is actually a function of aversion. So the bare bones state of mind, that's the exact opposite of attachment. Attachment and aversion are the two fundamental states of mind that we actually run between like a million times a day. Attachment is what's driving us. It's this emotional hunger that wants the nice thing. So when it sees the object that we think is nice, attachment goes, ooh, ah, and we go towards it and get all excited. Now, aversion is the moment it isn't what attachment wants. Aversion arises and goes, no, thank you. Now, that no, thank you can be very violent anger. It can be irritation, annoyance, upset, which we don't even pay attention to. They are examples of aversion because the wrong cake turned up on the plate. You wanted carrot cake and you got chocolate cake. You wanted hot tea, but the tea was only half cold. So you get irritated. You don't scream and kill the waiter, but you get annoyed. Annoyance is a mild level of aversion. Aversion is the bare bones state of mind behind anger. Now, even more subtle levels of aversion are depression. And there are buildup of many moments of aversion. The millisecond attachment doesn't get what it wants. Aversion arises. And if we're not such volatile people, this will catch us completely unawares. And one day you won't be able to get out of bed because you're inert from depression. It's the buildup of many moments of aversion, which is the opposite to attachment. It's very subtle. Can you hear me?
The link here for me is, say there's work, whether I know I should do it or I'm attached to the idea that I should do this work,
right?
That it takes effort and it doesn't give me immediate pleasure. So I develop procrastination and I don't do it. Then depression comes.
That's right.
Because I'm stagnant.
Well, you're thinking of depression as being indifference, and I think it's not.
Oh, I call it depression because for me, it's a heavy weight of, it feels like depression, not depression in the I'm sad, depression in the.
I understand. It's a buildup of aversion because, and also and it's like and also when we procrastinate, we criticize ourselves. So it is aversion because it's anger against yourself, but a milder level, not a violent level. No, it's true. It's an attachment. So, okay. So the thing is, Okay, so what are the methods? Forget even about the Dharma level of enthusiasm. The methods we need to use to help ourselves get over that because in this, okay, this is an interesting point. Every time you put off doing that job, what's happening is attachment only wants the nice things. And so when in some jobs you like to do, so you go, oh yeah, I'll do that job. And then the other job is next to it. And so quickly you go, no, I'll do it later. Why? Is because you have aversion for it. So every time you say no, the aversion keeps building until eventually you can't stand the sight of it. So to change that habit is like moving a tanker in the opposite direction. And that's the only solution. You've got to learn to have the discipline to say, I will do it. And every time you put it off, it gets harder and harder and harder to want to do it. So don't expect to be all joyful overnight when you start to do the job you don't want to do. It takes a lot of reprogramming of your mind to go against the aversion for it, which goes quite deep, until eventually you have enthusiasm for it. So it takes a lot of work to do that shift. And we've just got to persevere with it. If we can understand theoretically that when you do have enthusiasm, that itself, when you do the job, it gives you pleasure right there. You know yourself, you put that job off for 6 weeks and then you do it, you feel so much better about yourself. And that's why we got to really give ourselves these carrots. There's nothing wrong with that. We know it only took 30 minutes, and you can't believe the burden for the 6 weeks carrying this big burden around. And suddenly you've done the job, you feel so much better about it. And so, and the other one, another way to put it is this: every time we make effort, like even if it's just simply, I'm going to not eat so much chocolate cake. The attachment wants to have the cake. The cake comes, your mind is in the groove of going to the cake. You catch yourself, you say, no, Matthew, and no, Andrew, I've said I won't have more than one piece. So you have to make effort to go against the attachment. But the interesting point is, the second you succeed in not having the second piece, you feel good about yourself. So when you make effort, when you engage in something, you taste your own potential, and that's what gives us pleasure. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It makes perfect sense, especially when, there's a clear cause and effect. I think I get lost in these kind of gray areas of, I mean, I'm using the example of the job I don't want to do, but sometimes it's a question of, well, what should I be doing right now? Like
that part I don't understand.
Okay, like for example, I'm an artist. I go into the studio, I make drawings and sculptures, right? And sometimes I'm like, I don't know what I'm working on, and I should be down there trying to figure it out, but I don't know what I'm doing.
Okay, that's fine. That's okay. I mean, that can then just be this constant. This is now the deepest level of attachment, which is this thing that drives us to always be dissatisfied. So maybe the thing then is just, if you can't think of a thing to create and you haven't got a job on your plate, to relax and just relax and enjoy and see your mind and go for it, or do something different. But we tend to have this constant dissatisfaction. And even if you were sitting in the studio 24 hours a day, you'd still be dissatisfied, thinking you should do more or do better. So we've got to also learn to be content with right now. That's learning to be content this moment. That's pretty, I mean, it sounds so simple, it's a joke, but it's profound. Stop all the time the neurotic pushing.
Right. And I think that's the thing I get. That's where it comes back to my initial question is I have joyful effort when I'm doing those things that give me pleasure, that make me think good things about myself. And I take a lot of pleasure in doing my sitting practice as well, even when it's hard work. But when it's in between because when I'm doing a meditation, I know what I'm doing. I'm watching my breath, I'm saying my mantra, blah, 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 blah. Even if it's difficult, it's clear the steps. It's when I don't know what to do and I feel like I should be doing.
No, I know. Well, then maybe, I mean, then, okay, if you can't think of a thing to do with your body and your speech, which is what you're talking about, or your body in this case, then just watch your mind. That's that's called Mahamudra. Just watch your mind and learn to observe it. Sort of like watching how something works. If you look at a painting, you're trying to analyze what the artist did. That's okay. You're observing something. So observe your mind in those times. That's something to do. That's a brilliant job to do. Not a joke. Do you understand? Nothing wrong with that. But this, it's also can be driven by what I'm saying, though, driven by this constant dissatisfaction. You always think you've got to be doing something.
Right.
That just can be neurotic, you know.
Right. Thank you.
All right, John. Thank you so much, Andrew. Yes, Victor, talk to me.
It kind of, hi, and I don't know if you've answered this already, but what you were just saying is a part that I get really hung up on, is we talk always about observing our mind, observing our thoughts.
Sure.
And it's kind of like when you get to that point that I try to jump from just observing to kind of get rid of that duality a little bit, that I just get so hung up and very.
You have to go into details what you mean by that, Victor, going to get rid of the duality. What do you mean?
Well, what I mean is kind of that whole thing about observing the observer.
Okay, don't get too caught up. I get what you're saying. Listen, Victor, don't worry about that. It's okay. We can get very neurotic about that. There's no observer in there. It's the best way to think it. Okay. We're at the ordinary day-to-day level. We're in the level where we're functioning through our senses and our conceptuality. That's what daily life is. So you've got to be on the alert. So you got to have the dualism. It's the nature of that life is that it is dualistic. So don't get all worried about it. When you're in your meditation and you're doing Mahamudra, let's say, you're meditating on emptiness, and the goal is to try and get the non-duality. But don't get too caught up in that in your daily life. I mean, we've got to be watching our mind every second, because everything in our mind drives what our body and speech do, and our body and speech are the things that do the harm and also do the good. So we've got to have this learning to have this incredible awareness and this consciousness, which keeps developing in us, because we're not used to that. We're not brought up with that. And our tragedy is in our culture, we tend to only notice what's happening in our mind when it becomes physically evident. And that's a bit like noticing the wheels are falling off at 100 miles an hour. It's a bit late, So this is where, as we just keep getting better and better and better at it, it is a dualistic practice. It's perfectly reasonable to have a dualistic practice. That means to say, and don't think it's the observer, Victor, because that's just a label for an I. And then we put too much focus on, I am watching my mind. If you analyze, there's no big concrete I doing it. So the more simple way to say it is, you see, your mind has many parts. And the mechanics of your mind, like intention, attention, discrimination, good memory, they're the mechanical parts of your mind, and this is my term, that enable you to do any job at all, whether you kill somebody or whether you're a nice person. They're the parts that have to work well. So they're the parts that we have to utilize to do the job of distinguishing in Victor's mind between an angry thought and a loving thought, a depressed thought and a generous thought. Our thoughts at the moment, and they even say that in the West, they've got 1,000 thoughts a second. And we just see it as a river of feelings. So we've got to start to get really articulate, really, really conscious, and locate the thoughts as they pop up, and then have this wisdom to recognize, well, that was anger. And, maybe you've been following it for 25 minutes. You don't realize that's our problem. But we've got to catch it before it gets too violent. And then you can cut it at the root. Oh, shut up. Give it a break, Vic, and let it go. So your wisdom is watching anger. Your wisdom is watching love and kindness. Don't think I am watching. Don't get like that. You get too caught up and too cosmic like that. The different parts of your mind are all working together to do the job of developing clarity and wisdom and discrimination. So that's exactly what you do if you're trying to be a good cook or a good driver. You're using these parts of your mind to discriminate. There's this, there's that, there's this. That's what we're trying to do with the mind. So you're locating the contents of your mind. Don't think I am doing it, or the observer. Don't think like that. That gets very cosmic. Are you with me?
I do. Thank you so much.
This is day-to-day life of observing your mind. I mean, you've got to do this. Think of any other job you do. It's completely dualistic. You have to have your wisdom observing. If you're trying to learn mathematics, you've got to really squeeze your brain to think of all these different details. If you're trying to be a good cook, you're watching so many things. Well, all we're doing is using the same ability to observe and be intelligent and discriminate to observe the thoughts in your own mind, Victor. Don't sort of romanticize it or fantasize it or mystify it. You with me?
Yes,
this is a dualistic job in its nature. But the better we get at it, the more spontaneous and the more natural it becomes. Like knowledge about anything, Do you understand?
I do. Thank you.
Good, Victor. Well, people, look, it's 8:30. It's time to go home. Like a dream. It's all gone. Isn't it?
Yeah, we're so sad, Venerable Robina, for our teachings to be over. Your intelligence and wisdom is just phenomenal.
I'm glad, darlings. So we
We
just
hope we'll see you again soon, maybe
absolutely.
in
Let's see each
person
other. Don't
sometime.
hesitate. Don't hesitate. So easy these days with Zoom, you know. So we think all these days we've been together, this 90 minutes tonight, as many thoughts as we've had, many moments we've had these thoughts, as many seeds we've planted. So we delight in this, you know, we delight in this job of being our own therapist, being our own friend, if you like. Be happy with it, be delighted, be glad, you know, and think I'd never give up making effort to see my mind ever more clearly, to observe my body, my speech ever more carefully, so I can turn myself into this marvelous person. As Lama Zopa says, we can mold our mind into any shape we like. It's very encouraging, you know. Why? For our benefit. If we don't see it's for our benefit too, we have totally missed the first part of practice. We've got to delight in this and be joyful, I swear. Be so happy for ourselves. And then we can be happy for others, you know. Jangchub Sem Chogrin Poche Ma Ke Panam Ke Gyuchig Ke Panyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gong Ne Gong Du Helwa Shog. And maybe, yeah, that'll do. May compassion grow and grow in the hearts of all. Everybody. Thank you, sweethearts. Everybody. Okay.
Thank you
Never
so
give up.
much.
Never give up and never give up. Okay. That's it. Thank you, sweethearts. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Venerable Robina.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mama Yeshi House.
Thanks for hosting, Elizabeth.